Welcome to the Drips Draughts podcast, where we help you bring your craft to draft. From soda to beer and from coffee to kombucha, we'll discuss making your favorite craft beverage in small or large batches and how to best serve it on draft. Hey there, and welcome back to the Drips Draughts podcast. I'm Brendan Hansen, I'll be your host, and today we're going to be talking about draft equipment. We'll basically be doing a draft equipment overview, kind of a run-through of the common components of a draft system. If you need to refer back to this episode, you can do so by going to dripsanddraughts.com/2. So what is a draft system? A draft system is basically just a way to push any beverage from a keg to a faucet by using a compressed gas, whether that gas be carbon dioxide, a blend of carbon dioxide and nitrogen, or just 100% nitrogen. I'd say that most people are familiar with the faucet or the tap portion of the draft system. You typically see faucets at bars and restaurants, but until now, you probably haven't given much thought to where that beer that pours from that faucet comes from. You just know that you order a beer, the bartender pulls the handle forward, and there you go, your glass is full of beer. So today we're going to run through all the components of a draft system, just kind of a broad overview, so you can get familiar with what goes into actually serving, whether it's a beer or a coffee or any other craft beverage. So let's get started. Let's jump into this a little bit. Basically, in any draft system, you're dealing with a gas side and a liquid side. And the gas side and the liquid side, you can just imagine that they're divided by the keg. That's where they both meet up, and that's kind of where the magic happens as well. So let's start with the gas side of the draft system. You're going to have a gas tank or a gas cylinder. Typically in a beer environment, that's going to be CO2, sometimes a beer gas, which is a blend of CO2 and nitrogen. CO2 tanks, CO2 cylinders use a CGA 320 valve. It's male threaded on the cylinder, whereas a nitrogen tank uses a female threaded valve. It's a CGA 580 valve. But regardless of the type of tank and the type of valve, the gas tank, the gas cylinders provide a common purpose. They pressurize your draft system. Now, these gas cylinders are under a very, very high pressure, so you wouldn't be able to hook this directly up to your keg. What you need to do is, in line, you're going to put a regulator, which basically takes the full tank pressure down to a usable pressure for your draft system. Most regulators that you find are going to allow you to adjust the pressure of your system to between 0 and 60 psi. So I mentioned that CO2 cylinders have a male threaded CGA 320 valve. On the CO2 regulator, you're going to have a female threaded nut that attaches to the CO2 tank. And then just the opposite on the nitrogen cylinder. The nitrogen cylinder has the female threaded CGA 580 valve, and the nitrogen regulator is going to have a male threaded end that basically goes in and attaches to the nitrogen tank that way. So after the gas cylinder, after the regulator, most draft systems are going to be split out to any number of kegs, or maybe you're doing this at home and you're basically running gas directly from your regulator to the keg. There's basically a few different options in terms of setting up your gas system. So from your regulator, you can run a gas line to what's called an air distributor. This would then split your gas line into multiple gas lines, allowing you to pressurize and serve multiple kegs at one time. The one drawback in using an air distributor, if there are any drawbacks, is that each one of those lines is going to have the exact same pressure that is set at the regulator level. So if you're serving different beverages, different types of beers, you might want to have different pressures going to each keg. So if that's the case, if you do want to control the pressure going to each keg individually, then you're going to need a bank of regulators. So you can have a multi-body regulator that attaches either to your primary regulator or directly to your tank. And what that's going to let you do is control pressure individually to each keg. So I mentioned earlier that our keg is kind of the midway point. It's the dividing line between our gas side of our draft system and our liquid side of our draft system. So attached to your regulator, attached to your air distributor, you're going to have gas lines. gas lines basically run from your distributor or from your regulator to either a disconnect or to a keg coupler. Disconnects and keg couplers basically just let you attach your gas line to the keg. So when talking about disconnects and couplers, we've got a couple different types that we should talk about. We've basically got corny kegs, which were used by the soda industry back in the day and now are hugely popular among home brewers. Many coffee shops use these, many mobile serving companies use these. And then we have Sankey kegs, which are kind of the commercial kegs that you're used to seeing at large breweries or from large breweries. Or maybe think back to your college days. You've probably seen a Sankey keg at a college frat party. So depending on the type of keg that you have, you're going to need a different fitting to connect the gas line to that keg. With the corny kegs, each gas line is going to have its own disconnect on the end. And with corny kegs, you've got either a ball lock disconnect or a pin lock disconnect based on the type of corny keg that you have. With Sankey kegs, you basically just need a keg coupler. There are different keg coupler types based on regions, but here in the States, we use an American Sankey D-style coupler. So I already got into describing kegs a little bit, but going back, you've got Cornelius and you've got Sankey kegs. Cornelius kegs have two posts. They have a gas in and they have a liquid out post. And then you've got one of two choices with corny kegs. You've got a pin lock version, which basically has pins on the posts that kind of allow you to lock your disconnect on. And then you've got ball lock corny kegs, which basically just have a ball lock fitting that kind of pops over the post and kind of locks in place that way. So as opposed to corny kegs, Sankey kegs have a single point of entry, and that's all done through the keg coupler. Whereas the corny kegs have a liquid post and a gas post, Sankey kegs just have that single point of entry, and it's all handled through the keg coupler. All right, so we've finished discussing the gas side. We've gotten to the keg. We've discussed the keg. Now we're talking about the magic, the beverage side, the liquid side. Every draft system needs to have a beverage line or a liquid output. So the beverage line is going to be connected to a disconnect or to the keg coupler, allowing your beverage to flow from the keg. Whether that beverage is beer, coffee, kombucha, soda, maybe a mixed drink. The beverage line is basically just going to help you get that drink where it's going, to the glass. At the other end of the beverage line is the part that I alluded to earlier that most of us are familiar with and that we've seen, is the faucet or the tap. So there's a few different types of taps. There's a few different types of faucets. We'll kind of just run through those real quickly. One, you've got the party tap. This is probably the one you've seen in college. It's basically just a hose with a cheap little plastic fitting at the end that allows you to serve without the need for a large setup. But more commonly, and something you've probably seen within the last week, is a standard faucet, like a beer faucet. These are seen on countertops. They come out of towers. Sometimes they're mounted directly into a wall. Regardless of how they're mounted, the beverage line is basically going to go into what's called a shank, and that shank has a fitting that allows a faucet to be screwed onto it. The shank basically spans the gap from inside the fridge or inside the beer tower to outside where the faucet is attached. So attached to the shank is obviously the faucet. And there's tons of different types of faucets. You've got chrome faucets. You've got stainless steel faucets. You've got plastic faucets. So faucets might be made out of almost anything, and they do help serve different purposes. But then you've got different types of faucets. You've got the standard beer faucet, which can be used for pouring any type of drink, really. Then you've got the stout faucet, which is common for pouring like a Guinness stout. And this is what's really, really popular among coffee drinkers right now is nitro coffee. Getting that rich, creamy, cascading pour, and then that heavy, rich, thick head on the beer or coffee. Next in line, you've got a couple other types of faucets. You've got flow control faucets, which are great for if you've got like an overcarbonated beverage, or maybe if the pressure in the draft system are just too high. What a flow control faucet does is allow you to regulate the flow of the beer or the coffee or the other whatever beverage it is at the faucet level rather than having to go maybe into the back room to adjust the pressure of the entire system. And then another type of faucet is a creamer faucet, which is basically a standard faucet. You can pull the lever forward to serve your beverage, but then you can also push the lever back and it adds a kind of frothing or creaming function to it. This creamer function can be found on many stout faucets as well. So you've got that pull forward pour, and then you've also got that push back creamer function. So that about does it for the draft system. The only other thing that you might be wondering, why hasn't he mentioned tap handles? Tap handles, I guess you could include them in the draft system, though they're not necessary for pouring the beer per se. But tap handles do get attention. You can add a lot of personalization with a tap handle. You can obviously add branding. They're great branding pieces. I mean, how many of you out there have ordered a beer or ordered a drink because of the tap handle that you saw at a restaurant or at a bar? They're definitely good attention getters. So I think that's going to do it for this second episode of the Drips and Draughts podcast. As always, if you've got any questions, feel free to email us at questions@coldbrewavenue.com. Or you could tweet us at coldbrewavenue on Twitter. If you've got draft system specific questions, which you probably do after today's episode, email info@kegoutlet.com. We're looking forward to the next episode, and if you are too, we'd appreciate it if you could go to iTunes and leave us a review. If you've already left us a review, maybe share this podcast with your friends. Whether you're looking to put a draft system into a coffee shop, or maybe you've got a friend who you want to convert his garage fridge into a kegerator, let them know to check us out. They can find us at dripsanddraughts.com. And this episode can be found at dripsanddraughts.com/2. So as always, recording this episode has brought up a couple ideas for future episodes. So some things you can look for in future episodes. What type of gas should I be using? What's the difference between CO2, beer gas, and nitrogen? How can I set up a mobile draft system? Can I make my own tap handles? All right, that does it for today. Thanks again for joining us on the Drips and Draughts podcast. You can find this episode at dripsanddraughts.com/2. Are you looking to learn more about cold brew and draft coffee? Join us in the Cold Brew Avenue private community to connect with and learn from other cold brew and draft coffee professionals. Plus, get access to exclusive content such as ebooks, how-to videos, buyer's guides, and more. You can learn more and apply for membership at forum.coldbrewavenue.com. Thanks to Keg Outlet for sponsoring this podcast. Thank you to everyone who has contributed questions and to you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. That does it for this week, but looking forward to seeing you again for the next episode of Drips and Draughts.